Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Hey, welcome to this panel sponsored by Portland Center Stage at the Armory about immersive technology, gaming, and AR/VR. For those of you out there who may not know what those stand for, it is augmented reality and virtual reality. My name is Ashely Mellinger. I'm going to be moderating this discussion today, and I am an actor, a producer, co-founder of Desert Island Studios, and currently I am helping to produce a show as the lead artist at Portland Center Stage called Summerfield Estates. Let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'd love to introduce Nisha Burton, who is a visual artist and designer in marketing. Take it away.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Nisha. Yes, I'm all those things. I am also a co-founder of a creative agency called Reflective Brands, and we specialize in immersive technologies, virtual and augmented reality, really leveraging these technologies to bring users into experiences and create really engaging, both like marketing tools as well as just so many applications in various industries. So I'm excited to get into it and discuss all of that. And thanks for having me here.
Cool. Let's kick it over to Reese Bowes.
That's correct. I am Reese. I'm a visual artist. I'm a designer. Sometimes I'm a software engineer and a strategist, among other things. As it relates to like what we're going to be talking about today, I've worked in computing as an engineer, as a industrial designer, and also as a software engineer. And some of the things I've worked on have been actual technologies from the ground up, relating to HMDs, so head-mounted displays, augmented reality displays, light field technologies, things like this. So happy to be here.
I don't even know if I know what light field technology
We'll talk about it.
I am excited to learn. Okay, cool. And then finally, Will Lewis.
Hello. So my name is Will. I'm the president and founder of the Portland Indie Game Squad, which is a 501c3 nonprofit kind of community platform. And what we do is we help people come together and make games together. So we host tons of events in Portland. A vast majority of them are free and open to the public. We do things just like meetups and co-working nights. We do kind of special events like a drink and draw where everybody comes in at Design Week Portland and plays games and makes fan art based on the games there. One of our staples is game jams, where people make games over the course of a very limited amount of time. So from start to finish, you're making a game in like a weekend or 2 weeks or something like that. So I was called in for that reason. And then by day, I'm a studio founder, co-founder and director of Rose City Games, which is just a game studio here. So we're working on 2 titles right now, publishing one called Garden Story, where you play as a cute little sentient grape. And we are just actually going to kick off a test period for one of our games, Floppy Nights, where you make digital projections of little monsters using floppy disks to do chores for you. And it's kind of like a strategy game. So thanks for having me on.
Like the floppy floppies or the actual floppy floppies?
The discs, yes.
It's like thinking back to back in the day when I first started using a computer. Well, great. Thank you so much, everybody, for introducing yourselves. We're all brought together in this space very fittingly on Zoom. We've been doing that a lot during the pandemic, and I think a lot of us have kind of lived in the digital realm or in the digital sphere in some way. But there's still so much about gaming and virtual reality and all of these new technologies that I think are worth exploring, especially when it comes to the creative industries. So the first question that I wanted to ask of y'all was, what do you think qualifies a technology, or maybe even just anything, as being immersive? And we'll start with Will.
Cool. Yeah, I would say interactivity is probably the base answer, and something that allows you to engage with something that's digital, whether that is interfacing with a different person or interfacing with something that is purely digital, such as like an artificial intelligence that you're like fighting against in a game or collaborating with. There's a lot of people, in addition to that kind of question of what does it mean to be immersive, of course, there's a lot of people with lots of different definitions of what a game is. Typically, when I'm teaching kids how to make games, or kind of like introducing people to making games, we usually say just like, yep, the player has to have some sort of input and there has to be some sort of win condition, which I don't think is necessarily true. It's just a good thing for kind of learning. There's a lot of games out there that are a lot more about experiences. There are a lot more games out there that, even though they are very gameplay heavy, some of the most memorable moments come through just with kind of the socialization that you can perform through an avatar emoting, or by seeing like crowdsourced results on screen from a game that you're seeing kind of like projected to yourself, that you might have just a little bit of input where everyone is making decisions. So yeah, I would probably start off saying that kind of like interactivity and your ability to have agency in a digital product is one of the most stock terms, stock ways to define immersivity.
Yeah, cool.
If that's a word.
Yeah, sure. It is what you, yeah, it is now.
It is now.
That's interesting. I've never heard of these like crowdsourced games before. I'm very curious about that. Okay, yeah. Nisha, how about you? Your definition of immersive.
Oh, yeah, I agree with what Will said. And it's I love that question, because lately I've been thinking about that a lot. With what defines immersion. And my business partner and we used to run an in-person event around immersive technologies in Portland. It was called Design Reality. Obviously, with COVID and restrictions happening, we weren't able to do the in-person. And so over this last year, we've moved a lot of that networking and what we used to do onto Clubhouse. And both of us agree that Clubhouse actually is a very immersive platform. For people that don't know, it's an audio-only social networking tool that's on your phone. And we're able to have amazing conversations with people that are interested in immersive technologies all over the world. And being audio-only, you wouldn't think you would categorize it as immersive, but really, for me, what immersivity is about, and again, maybe I made up that word, but it's really about presence. And that's what we always talk about with virtual reality and augmented reality too, is that it has such an ability, especially virtual reality, to make people feel like they are actually present in the situation, different from maybe watching a movie, although movies can bring you into that state of presence. And so with the audio only platform too, I've found a great deal of presence. Like it's similar to sitting around with friends, and maybe even taking the video element out of it. We all know about Zoom fatigue at this point. By taking that out, somehow it gives more presence. So I would say, as we move forward, thinking about our definitions of what makes something immersive and really expanding those makes a lot of sense to me.
Cool. Thank you, Nisha. I really love that use of the word presence to describe immersion. Yeah, that's really cool. Reese, you got anything you want to add to this talk about immersive technologies?
I do. And the word is immersion. So I think, forgive me. So I think I've worked in this space for a little while. And I don't know if I said it, but I worked at Intel Labs for quite a while on projects like this. We would work on sort of like immersive kid spaces where, for example, you'd project onto the walls, like you'd make a blank room into a toy, for example, I'll just say it like that. Or, for example, behind me, there are two, I don't know how this is working, there are two patents. And this one, I think, this is one I was a co-author on, and I think what it describes is this idea of, when we talk about instead of something just being virtual, as we talk about like augmented reality or virtual reality where you're wearing a set of glasses, to display a digital space that is seemingly three-dimensional, but it's not. It's still flat. This particular idea talks about where you might be able to play with the physical space. I'm gonna pick something up where I have a ball, and I can throw this ball at the screen, and one of you on the other side would see this ball hit the screen, and then on the other end, you would be actually able to catch the real physical ball. But in between, there is like the digital version of that ball being represented. And so, of course, there's other things that would be involved in making that all work. Obviously, something that shoots a ball out at your end. And if you were to throw the ball back at me, it would shoot the ball back to me. And these ideas of like subverting or utilizing proprioception, you know, being able to say things like, I'm in this small studio of mine, but I can turn it into something that is seemingly infinite. And one of the ways that we can do this is do things like slightly make you turn very slightly such that you think you're going in a straight line, but at the same time, you're always turning. But in the virtual world, you think you're walking in one direction for miles, right? So I think there's like the idea and the terminology or the notion of what immersive can be is subjective. It depends on what perspective you're approaching that, right? So sometimes it's about the quality of the graphics. Oh, they have to be incredibly beautiful, you know, for a person who's playing a simulation to say that it's immersive, to qualify it as immersive. Or it's the quality of the gameplay, like how invested I become involved in the game, how well the incentives are utilized and employed in the game. Gamification is a huge thing. But that's like at the surface. I mean, this particular topic we could talk about for hours. I believe we could talk about it for hours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reese.
No problem.
Also, gamification is a new word for me, so there's another one. Before I ask this next question, I also wanted to let those in the audience know that if you have questions, you can type them into the chat, and we will grab them and probably talk about them a little bit later. So feel free to drop any questions or comments or anything into the chat. We'll read them. Okay, so my next question kind of actually touches on what you just talked about, Reese. So this question might be obvious for someone like Will who works in video games, but I'm curious about how gaming or the concept of play figure into the work that you do specifically. And so let's actually go to Nisha for this one.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I love about the work that I do is that a lot of it is play, with these technologies being emerging technologies and a new medium for storytelling and communicating. It really is a lot about this uncharted territory where we do, have filmmaking, we have storytelling by writing books, we have digital marketing, all of these things that are kind of tried and true. And there are some elements of those pieces that really work well and can be incorporated into immersive technologies. Whereas at the same time, there is this space for play and exploration and really figuring out what works and what doesn't work in this unique medium. I've seen people approach it and I come from a film background, and so trying to just carry over, like in 360 video, what one might do in a documentary, of having the 360 camera, be a fly on the wall. And sometimes it works, but sometimes it really doesn't work because the audience is that more present and immersed within the story. It can sometimes feel like they're a little bit trapped within that space if the story isn't told in the right way for 360 degrees, and for the ability, like Will was saying earlier, to really interact and engage with the story. And I think that's a big strength within immersive technologies and immersive storytelling, is giving people the opportunity to have that agency and choice even if it's as small as you're letting them decide where they're looking, or as large as they're actually co-creating and shaping the story with, say, a branching narrative. So it's really fun to play in these realms coming from a film and storytelling background, because it's like a new space of exploration and what is possible when you can give people those very lived experiences.
Totally. Yeah. As a filmmaker myself, I'm also so excited to see how these emerging technologies play out in storytelling. Reese, yeah, gaming and play, how does it figure into your work?
Well, since I'm no longer working strictly on things like virtual and augmented reality, but in terms of like doing, let's say last year, I was working on a project with a certain automobile manufacturer, and they were thinking about the future of autonomous vehicles, right? And so some of the ways in which we think in general in design, or designing through problems, we'll do role play. And so where it's like, what is it like for me to be a passenger or a driver in this kind of vehicle? We situate just chairs, and if I illustrate it, we just situating ourselves in chairs and like think about how we might interact with this thing, right? This virtual space in our minds that will eventually become a real thing. So sort of like teasing out the so-called pain points, if you will. I mean, we've talked, some of us know what that term means, but teasing out in the form of play. So play, we talk about it in the very general sense, is actually a large part of how I think through things. I'm pretending. I pretend what my client wants, or I pretend like I am my client's customer or consumer or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And I think about, well, do I like this? Do I care about whatever this is that they're trying to sell me, or I'm trying to make look better and help to sell it to others? That's sometimes how I use play, right? But in general, it's like situate in this virtual space that is my mind the problem, and then literally simulate, play with these problems, right? Yeah.
Well, I love that. I love that that play can also have this like practical use in certain settings too.
There's a lot of people that would agree, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as somebody who basically plays all day as my job, like I'm all about it. Yeah. Okay. Will, let's hear your hot take on how gaming factors into gaming.
Yeah, right. I think stepping back a little bit, and instead of talking about like, well, we make games, of course it's supposed to be fun, there's also that idea of like coming up with pillars to your product that you want to make sure people are hitting. And I guess I do really want to lean into that idea of role playing as well, especially because it's been really prevalent in my work just recently as we're prepping up for our game Floppy Nights to come out to a bunch of people who are going to be kind of like testing the design in a specific way for a while that we haven't tested in a long time. So I think going into that angle of games and kind of like tutorialization, you really have to, if you're making a game, and this is a big misstep that a lot of people make when they try to make games, they go in and they say like, oh yeah, I like these kinds of games. I'm going to make a game for a person like me. And not only do people think like, oh, other people who like games like this will forgive these mistakes or these things that I don't have time for, or these things that I don't want to pay attention to. But there's also so much about tutorializing your game that you need to make sure is either like abundantly clear or diegetically clear as somebody is just starting to jump into your game. And it all depends on the vibe that you're trying to go for. But like sometimes, even if your game is story heavy, you just have to say, hey player, like I'm going to take you out of the immersion for a second, and I'm going to ask you to click the right click button when you want to do this, which is different than the left click button. So the way that really factors into play is you really have to do that role playing to try to think like, okay, like who's my audience? Am I making something for people who have never played games before? Then I might have to be that explicit. If I'm trying to go for like a mid-core gamer or something like that, then maybe I can play around with that a little bit. Like maybe my character can playfully break the fourth wall to teach you how to click the right mouse button kind of thing. I think that idea of leaning into teaching and play through a tutorial is especially applicable to VR. Even though the technology is great, like there's so much that just is not there yet. And one of the things that we really try to approach when we're developing virtual reality games is making sure that the interactions are toy-like. So that was another thing that Reese kind of commented on too, is just making sure that things are simple, like push a button or pick up and push a button. In addition to that, you probably want to do one before the other so that the player understands what's going on. And then you can kind of layer fun on that. But those interactions are kind of fun and in themselves. They are something that the player is probably familiar with, but because they're in this kind of new novel world, they might have a little bit more fun with it than they might have otherwise. So I think paying attention to those kinds of things is really, really important. And the reason that you get that benefit with VR is because you are more in a space that some people might be more familiar with. I guess also to just kind of like step back too and look at that angle of event organizing and community organizing with that role playing and with that idea of play. I think there's also that huge baseline of comfort that you have to lay down. And I think that that's you kind of have to have people in a comfortable environment before they are in a playful environment. Something that we really take seriously in the community is our code of conduct, sharing the context of our code of conduct to people as they are new to the community or as they are coming in to watch our streams that we do or anything like that. Because everybody who's collaborating together, they absolutely have to feel like they're in a safe creative space before they can create together. So I think that's another thing that you have to lay a baseline down for before you even consider play. You have to consider your users' kind of psychological safety before even being able to approach those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Also, I'm just thinking about like the Resident Evil series and how if I wasn't on a cozy couch, like surrounded by warmth and like safety, I would probably explode playing those games.
Well, you should probably try to play Resident Evil 7 in VR and see how loud you scream.
No way. I don't think I can do it. I'm not. I just think it's a step too far.
It's too far. It's too scary.
Okay. So my next question is kind of, this is being presented by Portland Center Stage at the Armory. They have done this series of original works, which have all been online. And this project that I'm working on now is really interactive and it's meant to be immersive, but, it's not in a theater on a stage with an audience as it would be traditionally. And so, in theater, there's often this like really keen awareness of the audience and their response, because they're right there in front of the actors and in front of everybody. And I'm kind of curious about what you feel are the unique ways that, VR, AR, immersive technology, all of those things, how those things can reach an audience in ways that maybe theater or even film can't. I think Nisha kind of touched on this a little bit. And I would just love to hear more about your thoughts on that. And let's kick it back to Reese.
I have an example of something. So a few years ago, again, this is when I was working at Intel Labs. I think one of the sister teams or something like this was working with the Royal Shakespeare Company. And you can look this up on YouTube if you'd like. At the time, the Royal Shakespeare Company and Intel were working on their presentation of, I believe, The Tempest is what it was. And what they were doing was, imagine you're at this cinema, this auditorium, and there are these massive banners. There's the stage in front of you. There are actors, but they are kitted. I think they were kitted at the time with motion dots, right? So that
mocap.
Yeah, mocap. The stage is instrumented with cameras so that it will capture them. So not only are they acting, right? They're acting out the scenes as normal sized human beings. Their avatars, or these sort of virtual avatars, are also being represented on these large, I think they were fabric banners behind them. So if you're in the audience, you get to see not just what's happening in front of you with these live actors, but also for example, whatever character might, Banshee, you know, this actor is a Banshee, is 80 feet tall, right? I think that for me was one of the more sort of compelling examples of how you can use, I think, you know, more real-time technology to display something that is, even though it's not, it is augmented, it's an augmented for sure, sort of reality. It's not necessarily something that you are inside of, right? You're watching it from a distance. You're gazing from a distance. This example, you know, that the other one is Bandersnatch. If you remember, I don't know if you've all seen the Black Mirror movie. That was basically choose your own path. That we know that there's a particular audience. I'm not really touching on that aspect of the question, but just that example of what they did to tease out all these different kinds of pathways in a story and how they might be engaged with, I think was phenomenal. And the way that it was so hyped up and how people were just like, there was a buzz about it, just in the same way that I think, you know, talking about crowdsourced gaming, Pokemon Go, I never played it, but people were going nuts over this game. And I think they still are in some cases, we just don't see it. You know, to take something, for example, like The Tempest, that is tried and true, it's an old story, right? And then to reinvent it for a new kind of experience is something I think is what we've been trying to do. You know, as I watch the sort of evolution of this current phase of augmented and virtual reality, it's like we're kind of dying down, we're kind of staying in a certain place. But at the very beginning, at least, you know, a few years ago, it was like, everything is so new and it's great. Let's try everything. And now we're kind of, let's try things that work and make them work better, right? You know, Will was talking a little bit, and I'll shut up in a second, but Will was talking about, you know, making things simple, how we in VR versus, you know, console gaming and using a mouse and a keyboard, we have different affordances that we are presented with and how we interact with certain objects. We want to be able to touch and grab things with our fingers, but again, we have to use these, you know, these joysticks to do that, and that's still not, it's not natural. It's not a natural interaction. And then, you know, that's just for able-bodied persons. So it is a feat to try to reach all audiences when we're building out these kinds of experiences, or any experience really. And sometimes we succeed. It's just depends on what that experience is tailored towards. What is it that we're trying to do, and who might best experience it, I suppose, or afford it, or whatever. So,
yeah. I mean, I love that you touched on like accessibility too a little bit, because I do think that, you know, theater is not, and it's changing a little bit, you know, but it hasn't always been accessible, or it's not always accessible to everybody. Even films, you know, like seeing films in a theater is super expensive. You know, it can be, you have to go out of your way sometimes to go see something. And I do think these emergent technologies have the capacity to reach audiences who maybe aren't as welcome in other spaces to participate in other creative forms. Cool. Same question for Nisha. The ways in which what you do kind of reaches an audience differently.
Yeah, definitely. I can think of a few examples, and I actually was working with some folks who were formerly at OSF and looking at, with augmented reality, how to take the theater knowledge and understanding of audience and viewer and person participating, how to bring them into this augmented reality space and transfer that knowledge over into a more digital realm. And what that means, kind of like Reese was talking about earlier, where you can take this analog approach to understanding what works and what doesn't in the space before you even develop anything out, and then bringing the user into these experiences more deeply, where it's almost like a collective dream. That's a lot of times how augmented and virtual reality feels, is it has this dreamlike quality to it. So rather than creating the stage that people are viewing from, you know, their seats and they're the audience, you're really able to bring them into that world that you've built. And again, immerse them in this way that they have, if you want, agency, if you want to do a branching narrative, but even just being present in the story so much more deeply is really exciting. And, you know, with virtual reality, obviously it's easy to fully bring them in, but even with augmented reality, if you use their physical environment and then have digital assets overlaid and have these elements that are coming in from the story with their real world space, I think that's really powerful. I mean, in the field that I'm in, a lot of people, when I tell them what I do, they're like, oh no, but we're already so addicted to our screens. We're already, you know, not interacting with one another, even, you know, more in the last few years. And so is this just going to drive us further into isolation? And to that, I say, with these really hopeful examples, that it actually could get us out more, and it could get us, with social VR and social AR too, it can get us interacting with each other more. And so I think that's a really cool potential and space that people have been exploring theater in social VR, and seeing how they're able to have the audience really participate more. You know, the Underpresents, they did quite a few shows and they were really popular, like always sold out, because everybody wanted to experience what it's like to be in a play of sorts, but be in VR in that space. And so I think it's really exciting, the potential with people coming in from the theater background into this space of immersive technology, and the knowledge that is embedded within this long form of, you know, storytelling for many, many years, to bring that into the virtual space. And the understanding, really, you talked about filmmaking, you know, that is a flat medium, but with theater, people do understand it as a spatial medium. And that's really what immersive technologies are spatial mediums. So bringing that knowledge into it, I think is really powerful. And it's been fun to work with different people with theater backgrounds in that exploration.
Theater people are pretty cool, I have to say. If you don't know any, get to know them because they're fun. Great, and that leaves Will. The ways in which, you know, immersive technology, or even the work that you do, kind of reaches an audience differently. I know you touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear any other thoughts you might have.
Yeah, there's lots going on. I mean, with regard to that kind of community organizing element, I think there's really two very important points that Nisha and Reese brought up around. There's that idea of kind of like the social element of things, and there's also that idea of accessibility. And I think one thing that we've really learned with the Portland Indie Game Squad doing our like game making challenges over time, and I guess this is another kind of comment on how Reese is talking about, just like, yep, like we're kind of used to a lot of these technologies now, and it's not as big and as full of hype as when, you know, virtual reality was first a thing, or any of those kinds of things. You know, I know a lot of people who have turned to that idea of like, oh, it's time to make my own experiences. And they're not only learning about how to impart their stories to others, but they also have to learn how to do it with other people, because especially with something like games, you know, you have for a game jam, you know, a game making challenge, for a couple of weeks, we typically recommend people start with like an artist, a programmer, and a musician kind of thing. But a lot of people make their teams bigger or smaller or anything like that. And I think with the pandemic, one thing with that idea of things being social and things being accessible that's really opened up is there were a couple of tools that were made a little bit more accessible. They cost a little bit less in light of the pandemic. Like Discord was something that we moved our community from Slack to Discord because their video chat feature was a lot better. And I think another thing that both Nisha and Reese are kind of leaning into too is that concept of like a collective memory, like a shared memory. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important in immersion, because you are able to also take that back out into your life and remember that a real person was there with you. And when we're doing community organizing, That was something that before the pandemic, we really wanted to focus on in our community, is like making sure that like, even if it's small, just like a larger commemorative event would always have some sort of thing for people to bring home. And, 3 years later, people will not leave me alone about how there has to be a new PIGSquad branded coffee mug at the next big event, because, oh, I see it all the time. It reminds me of all the good times I had. And other people are like, yeah, I have that same thing. That was a great event. Those kinds of things are becoming more accessible. And I think that's something we really learned in the pandemic with something like Discord. And we kind of just didn't stop. Like PIGSquad, we typically would run like 3 to 5 in-person events a month, and between like 50 and 90 developers would come out to them, whether that was like co-working or whatever. And we just kind of didn't stop. We just moved it to Discord. And of course, we're not in person, but a lot of people are still watching the same streams. A lot of people are still interacting with each other in the same way. A lot of people are like kind of approaching the same challenges by trying to make games together. And I think that's something that really reaches people in a really interesting way, and in a really impactful way too. And I guess to also just kind of like very quickly comment on the just medium of games. So kind of stepping back from community organizing and social events and everything like that. I think just in games as well, one thing that can really, really appeal to people in immersive technology mediums is that every single person approaches things from a different angle when they're looking at like a challenge, which is typically something that a game has. There are multiple solutions to the same problem. And I think that's something rare and unique about immersive technology. Typically urgency is a thing that is always happening. Like there is that idea of like going out to see a movie or something like that, but like, and there is an urgency to that. Like it's only going to be running for so long. But if you're in a game and, I hate to do it, but the Resident Evil example, like there's a zombie in my face, better get it out of my face right now. That is really, really impactful to people. And also just that idea of novelty. Like I think in immersive technologies, and especially in games, even extremely challenging games, people will like lean into the novelty of that game instead of the challenge of that game. And people will all have different approaches. They'll take a game very seriously versus like, wow, that was a goofy social experience that I just had with somebody I've never met online. I don't even remember their username. Like I think Dark Souls is a great example where people just do weird stuff. Like they dress their characters up really weird, but then they have to go up and play, what everybody thinks is like the hardest boss ever kind of thing. And I think that's really special. And it kind of leans also into that social element.
Cool. Thank you for all of these amazing answers. I definitely am getting the feeling like I'm in the room with some very intelligent and smart people, because I feel like my vocabulary has expanded quite a bit in just this half hour that y'all have been talking. So my next question is about how you each see your respective fields, your work kind of developing in the future. What do you see as being the future of VR? What do you see as being the future of gaming? As a theater artist, I have to tell you, I hope that in the future we have regular theater again. That's definitely something that I hope for, with, an audience and seats and the stage lit up. But there's also this part of me that feels like, oh, there might be a version of theater where you put on a headset, or maybe not even, and the actors are acting out the play right there in your own living room, And I feel like there's just so much room for imagination and gamification in, all of these different art forms. So I'm curious to hear what you see as being kind of the future development of your respective immersive technology fields. I'll kick it back to Reese.
All right. I think it still it's still a burgeoning thing. So, but having seen it for many years now at places like SIGGRAPH and other kinds of conferences, Special Institute for Graphics and so on. As an industrial designer, when I do that work, I was very interested in how we might collaboratively design using VR headsets or even just AR headsets. There's two things I'm going to talk about. The first being, being able to collaborate in real time with individuals located afar on the same project at the same time in full scale, right? So I think I should say I'm excited to see whether or not that's actually going to continue developing in industry, and that kind of workspace. Now that we have the opportunity more so to say, I'm going to work from home. I'd rather just work from home and not have to travel and bring all my assets, my printed product, all of this, on a plane several thousand miles away, which is what I used to do. I'd go and pick up products that I designed here in Oregon, and I'd fly to Santa Clara. I'd pick them up, come back, because I had to get them manufactured down there, as opposed to saying, something like, let me send you this, and then we can work on it together, and then I can do, these kinds of things. The other thing, so that said, I think, these more interactive, collaborative virtual spaces, I'm forgetting what it's called, but I know that PewDiePie, if you know who that is, has been playing in this space. I forget what it's called. It looks like Second Life, but it's in virtual reality. I forgot what it's called. But that's a space where people can go and you can be whoever you want. You can build out your avatar and do whatever you want. I'm sorry I don't know the name of it right now off the top of my head. But those spaces are burgeoning. They're there. It's not in the mainstream, though. Will, I'll say you were geeking out there for a second. So like a lot of the geeks are like, let's go and we're going to play in these spaces, and they are. I had all these different headsets sitting here with me that I was going to show, all the way back to like the silly little Samsung Gear VR onto like the Quest. There's too many devices. And second, that's so much money too. It's ridiculous. The second thing I think is, so while I was at PNCA, so anyone who's listening, the Pacific Northwest College of Art, we had for a while, and I was a facilitator there. We had what was called the Make Think Code Lab. So it was a makerspace, right? And part of that makerspace included virtual reality, right? So using devices. And what I did, I taught workshops in drawing, painting, sculpture, and product design using VR headsets. And a couple of years ago, I was representative. We went down to, two of us, at least from that lab, went down to Facebook Oculus in Palo Alto or Santa Clara, wherever. And we met up with students from around the country, some from Canada, and other faculty members from other institutions who represented VR, right, in their teaching or their curriculum. And I remember meeting one student who was using Kinects, so AR, sorry, not Kinects, Hololens. They're using Hololens. Is that right? What is Microsoft's? It's the Hololens, yeah. So they're using Microsoft's HoloLens, right? Not Magic Leap, so the HoloLens. And what they had done, this student was, 19. This woman had put together this idea for NASA. Apparently she was an intern at NASA's, might have been JPL or something, but a wayfinding application that would allow you to see on another planet, if you're on Mars, the ability to see a path across terrain out in front of you, right? And that still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'm like, what she was doing is incredible. We were not doing that at Intel Labs. This young woman was doing it. And, NASA was funding her work. I think things like that are fantastic. I think those are the kinds of things that these, outside of gaming, these are the kinds of sort of applications that we can, really benefit from, I suppose, right? So those are my hopes.
Yeah. I kind of also keep wondering, when these technologies will kind of start hitting it in the mainstream. And I do think the thing that you brought up about, oh, the headsets are so expensive, or a lot of these technologies can be kind of costly, is one thing, and maybe one reason why they're not as mainstream. But I am curious to see like when everybody's really, I mean, everybody is going to have a headset maybe someday.
Yeah, not everyone can wear a headset or even see. So
it's true. And I mean, for those folks, you know, what is being created in these spheres too, that is kind of like in this same realm of augmented reality and virtual reality? I'm curious to know. Yeah, Nisha, the future of these emergent technologies, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Well, to speak to that question that you just posed, I think that with accessibility, it's like there are many inputs, and I've seen really interesting things done with haptics, and like we were talking about earlier, audio and spatial audio. And so if somebody is visually impaired, they could have a still immersive experience with 360 audio and haptics. So there's a lot of solutions and ways to bring people into these technologies. And I think as we think creatively about what that looks like and what a full experience looks like that can have many points of access, it's really exciting. But then to get to your second question, what I love so much about the work that I do is that we really get to create a lot of unique projects within various industries. So obviously entertainment is one that's kind of bringing a mainstream awareness to these technologies. But really within the healthcare industry, we've created some amazing applications for surgery training, PPE donning and doffing, and even there are really special use cases with pain management and helping, for example, burn victims be able to have their bandages changed, completely immersed in a VR experience. And using that, it's like a cooling VR experience. It's able to distract the mind and the brain from the pain and actually provide them the same amount of pain relief as they were before having to have copious amounts of morphine to deal with. So the ability for VR, the way it taps into our brains, we're still learning about, but it's pretty powerful. Also in therapeutic settings, we created an AR app for helping people with phobias, specifically arachnophobia and claustrophobia. And with their therapist in a therapeutic situation, they're able to face these phobias and have this level of agency in dealing with them, and knowing too that it is digital, that it's not a real element. So it takes a level of the apprehension away, but then really being able to use it for therapy and psychology. And so, there's education is another amazing one, and it kind of intersects with theater and being able to bring students into either historical events or learning about geometry or math, or physics. All of these things can be kind of abstract. And so really bringing them in a visual way into the environment and giving students the opportunity to play and to interact in this very lived, direct way, it's shown that it actually helps with knowledge retention, and it actually helps students to retain the information in such a deeper way than reading a textbook. We recently did a project where we were doing job training and training in soft and hard skills for individuals who had autism and social anxiety, and being able to be in this environment that may be kind of stressful, and learning how to deal with those stressors in VR, practicing it. So then when they get into these real world situations, they have these built skills, this foundation. So I think that, it's really amazing all of the ways that these technologies are coming into industries, and people might not realize, if they're just watching the entertainment industry, how pervasive these technologies already are. And I definitely agree that as we get the ability to have more comfortable headsets and also AR glasses of some sort, being able to go through our daily lives and then have these augmented elements come in and provide really useful information. We've had some conversations with folks who are thinking about, well, what if our menus had an AR aspect to them, and you were able to see the different food options in front of you? And it's really good side effect of these times is that people are very used to using QR codes now. And so that, can easily trigger an AR event. And so really getting people used to the interfacing these technologies slowly but surely, I think we're going to see in the near future them not so much becoming like, oh, this is this thing over here, but becoming a part of our everyday lives.
All right. That menu idea kind of got me hungry, actually, because I was like, oh yeah, it'd be so cool to like look at the menu and be like, do I want a cheeseburger? And then just like see it in front of you. Okay, great. And on that note, Will, I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of what you see the future of your industry, something in the future of your industry with these new emerging technologies.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really going on right now, I think less, I guess, semi-related to the technology itself, but also really relating to the communities around these technologies. There's been something happening for a while, and it's going to keep happening, and it's going to get bigger and bigger. There's so much more equity around how to utilize these technologies to, as I was kind of talking about earlier, like make your own experiences. And there's a lot of different ways in which communities have kind of stepped up, collaborated using, the internet and a lot of these different technologies to come together and make sure that different voices are heard. There's a lot of stuff going on right now in that kind of space of kind of making sure that the pervasive subject matter in games isn't violence. There's a lot of funds and programs and showcases that are dedicated to diverse creators right now. And I think that's something that there's been a couple of things recently where that's been able to kind of like explode in a way that also allows like very small creators to actually make a living at what they're doing, rather than, try it, do their first game release, it's a bust, and they can't do that anymore or anything like that. There's just more and more avenues. There's an interesting case study going on right now. There's this kind of like small movement in kind of indie games called wholesome games right now. And it's not like a genre, it's just kind of like a tagline that people started calling things that had to do with not necessarily nonviolent games, but also games created by diverse communities, games that were kind of dedicated towards comfort, games that are dedicated towards meditation or relaxation, and also games that are accessible not only to differently abled people, but also just from a kind of subject matter perspective, especially for people who just have never played games before. And not only have game making tools evolved to just like run on lower and lower spec computers, and not only have those softwares been able to get into more and more schools over time, but in addition to that, because there's all these creators now, there's also starting to be these communities jumping up that are championing these creators. And a lot of these creators and community organizers are getting really creative and getting out in front of the industry leaders and making a splash. Last year was really interesting for events for games because, E3 was canceled. The Game Developers Conference was canceled. The last event anyone went to, I'm so glad I didn't go, was PAX East, which was literally like the weekend before I started staying in. And summer came up and everybody was like, what's going to go? Like a lot of companies were still trying to get people to really come out when there was, no guarantee or anything like that. And a lot of the larger organizations like E3 and a bunch of like game publications and stuff like that announced that they were going to do a digital showcase, but they did it late enough to where everybody's scrambling. No one knew what was going on. Nothing was really unified. And the crew that is kind of like running these like social media accounts and kind of doing some community organizing around wholesome games pop up and say like, oh, well, we're going to do our showcase. We're going to get together with a bunch of people who have like, some of these games are pretty well known. Some of these games are not known at all. And we're going to give you a great show, everybody who likes these kinds of games. And they organized it to happen before any of the digital events that happened with the much larger industry leaders. And it exploded and was one of the best attended events of that event season. And they were able to do it again this year. And it really blew up. So now there's this huge, not only is there this huge collaborative of people who are trying to showcase these games, there are more people trying to make games as a result. There are more people trying to make non-violent games as a result, or as I said, cozy games or easily accessible games, or a lot of diverse creators are actually saying like, hey, there's actually a space for me. And here's a big showcase where 10,000 people were watching it that backs this up. And there's a space for me to talk, there's a Discord community, any of those kinds of things. My skin color is represented on characters when I create my character at the beginning of the game in all of these games that are in this showcase, but not on any of Xbox, of the things that Xbox are making. So like, I'm going to go do this instead. I think that's another thing where people are really just kind of grabbing the reins and using technology access, not only in game making, but also in just like general internet communication. And then just using everybody's kind of like literacy that's kind of growing over time to just say like, hey, we can do this too. And, sometimes it's not that expensive. It takes a lot of work, but a lot of people need to come together to uplift each other. And I think that is going to continue happening. There's another very small, much smaller group of people making games that are representative of like lower poly PlayStation 1 horror games. And it's just called Haunted PS1. And like they did their own showcase too and stuff, but it's just like some of these things are getting really, really big, but there's also a lot of niches popping out of these communities that are all taking community and access seriously. And I can't wait to see like what the next very niche community is. I can't wait to see what Wholesome Games does in the future, all those kinds of things. I think it's going to be really exciting.
Cool. I love that. I really hope like whatever future we're headed towards, may it be one that is more inclusive and like holds space for all kinds of creators. So I'm all about that. With the few minutes that we have left, I have a question here in the chat. It says, does live streams of multiplayer games approach improv theater in that there is a context, but the game AI, artificial intelligence, provides a random element to player interaction? And historically, aren't thespians players? Which is true. Thespians were referred to as players and sometimes still are. We probably have time for one person to answer this. So yeah, anybody want to take a crack at it? Do live streams of multiplayer games approach improv theater?
Of course they do. I mean, if you sit and watch people like, there's one YouTuber, and I am not a dork, okay? But his name is
totally
Dr. Disrespect. His name is Dr. Disrespect. I don't know how I got into them, but I'm typically one of these that plays these. I wanted to try what is this whole sandbox thing? What is this whole sandbox shooter? So there he is playing Call of Duty or whatever it is. But you should see the production that goes into what he does. It's an affair. It's like this huge thing to just sit there and watch how he is. He's got a character, he's in character for hours, sitting there, and just to watch him versus him playing the game is a spectacle in itself. But then as he's playing the game, it's also interesting. Mind you, these are all multiplayer and there's no AI typically. But yes, I think if you were to, there's a place called the VR Center of Excellence that I would walk into at this job I used to have. And these guys would be sitting there watching Twitch all day long. I don't know if one of them is watching right now, and I was like, you guys are such nerds, just sitting here and watching these other people play video games. It's so strange. It's so strange to like have the streamer, watching the streamer talking about the game and, things like this. But as it has evolved, I think it is definitely something that has become like this huge huge medium to absorb and to consume. Obviously, Twitch came up as a result of this, right? People playing video games. When it comes to like artificial intelligence or like NPCs and like the interaction, that's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know, other people in the call, have any ideas about that, but I suppose, the sort of like the surprise element would be something when someone is playing a non-multiplayer game or something. Let's imagine like something like a Skyrim kind of game. Also never played, sorry. If there were NPCs, these non-player characters walking around, and you have these sort of like, if the AI is bad, let's say, about that, or perfect example is Cyberpunk. If it ever becomes a game that is multiplayer, atrocious AI. I am not sponsored by them. I do not care. You have these interactions that are just like baffling because it's so bad. It's so bad that it becomes comical. I think maybe that's a good answer to the question. I don't know. That's one answer anyway. But yeah, thespians in the sense that
I do think that
go ahead with that.
If aliens came to the Earth and like attended an improv show, I think they also would be like, what are you doing? Like you're watching these people just make stuff up on the spot. There's something kind of strange about that.
I mean, you're making up the game as you go, but
exactly. We are at time, unfortunately, so I think we have to call this panel or bring this panel to a close. But I do want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Nisha, to Will, to Reese for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And I really enjoyed this. I am a self-proclaimed and self-professed nerd and dork, so I'm all about this, and I'm really excited to see all of the things that you are working on. And to the audience, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us, and hopefully check out some of our work soon. Take care and have a good night.